Welcome to the next video in our series on World War One. Today we're going to take a look at the Allied counter-offensive of 1918. So the response to the Ludendorff offensive, which as we've already seen petered out by July 1918. So what are the Allies doing now? Well, even before we see them peter out, let's take a look at where the lines are. So that red line is where the Germans have got to by July 1918. The Allies have stopped them, but this is a dangerous position. Of course, the Allies don't want to just rest here. They want to push back. They want to push the Germans back, at least back to the original line, and then let's see what happens. And so even before our final German offensive takes place in July, we've got a number of our Allied generals starting to think back on the offensive. What can we do now to push these Germans back? And I'm going to get you to take a look at one particular battle, not because it's one of the ones in our syllabus, but because it is a battle that really, I think, is a highlight of the way in which the strategies and the tactics have finally come together on the Allied side by 1918. So we're going to take a look at the Battle of Hamel. And this was overseen by an Australian general, Lieutenant General John Monash, and was mostly carried out by Australian troops together with some Australians. So Monash is planning a very tiny offensive in a place called Hamel, and it is near the town of Amiens. So on our big map here, that's the town of Amiens, and you can see in this inset here what we're talking about. There's Villers-Bretonneux, but the town of Hamel was just on the German side, just south of the Somme, so we're looking about here on our big map. So it's a small village, strategic place, back in control, but what Monash wants to do is highlight how we can coordinate all of the different aspects that are available to the British at this point in time to make a much more effective offensive. So we're only talking about a couple of kilometres, one small village. He plans it. Monash is a planner. He was an engineer before he went to war, and he is a meticulous planner. And so he's got it planned down. He's saying this offensive, it's going to take 90 minutes. That's it. That was his plan. Lots of reconnaissance done, lots of detailed plans, lots of orders given down all the way down to the lower level troops so that everybody has a clear idea of what's going on. One of the interesting things that Monash does is he wants to get brand new Americans who are just coming up to the front line. He wants to get them involved. And so his plan initially involves using American troops under his control. Now, the Americans were keen for this, and in fact, Monash sets the date as the 4th of July, very important for the Americans, of course, as the date of his offensive. Now, General Pershing eventually hears about this and withdraws a lot of the Americans, but some, about 1,000 Americans, did take part in this battle under the command of Monash, the only time that we've got the Americans fighting under other than American generals. So the other thing that Monash has got, he's got lots of brand new Mark V tanks. He's got 60 brand new tanks and this 90-minute plan to go in. And the Battle of Hamel is very successful. Didn't take him 90 minutes. It took him 93 minutes. And then the battle was halted. You can see here some Australians and Americans with the village of Hamel, the ruined village of Hamel in the background. Not ruined just by this battle, of course. And there you can see some of them in the village and what it looked like after the battle. That gives you a sense of the landscape as a result of all this fighting that's going on. One of the things that they did do was they captured, in that 93-minute battle, 1,500 prisoners, 2 field guns. You can see the Australians here proudly showing off what they've captured, and also 171 machine guns. The Australians lost just 1,000 casualties themselves, most wounded. And so what we see at Hamel under Monash's command is a very effective, tightly planned, well coordinated and very effective offensive. So the reason why I show you this is so that we can have a look at what was used. What did Monash use? And it's real, as I said, it's just this lovely little picture of what the Allies are capable of doing by this stage in 1918. It's taken the whole war to get there, but here we've got it. Now this, of course, is a painting on the left, but I find it really interesting because we see these different elements all combined. We've got our infantry, our tanks, and the use of the aircraft moving in. One of the things to also take note of that's important in this battle is also very precise, effective use of artillery. So what are some of the elements of this battle? As I've just said, large, precise use of artillery, but there was no preliminary bombardment. We didn't give away the surprise, but once the battle started, artillery was used very precisely, very precise creeping barrages, for example, and having used good reconnaissance, very targeted use of artillery to take out key German positions. And one of the ways that they use the reconnaissance, of course, is through aerial observation, but a range of other things, sound ranging, flash spotting, different techniques being used, and very detailed maps were given out to the troops before this began, and certainly the artillery sections. Excellent coordination of tanks and infantry. They actually trained together to make the troops feel more comfortable with the tanks. And by the time they went into battle, the infantry felt very comfortable moving forward with the tanks, and they were well coordinated between them. So we see them moving up together. And also, we've got new tanks. They're more modern, more reliable than what we'd seen in 1916, and very few of them don't make it. So only 3 actually didn't make their target along the line closer to Hamel. Also, very effective use of smoke shells to protect the creeping barrage as the infantry and the tanks moved forward. And also aircraft, not only used for reconnaissance, but also being used to, drop bombs on the other side as the battle continued. The other thing planes did was flew low over German lines at the beginning of the battle to help drown out the sound of the approaching tanks. Element of surprise. The tanks themselves were used not just for going into battle, but also to carry supplies. So tanks can carry, if you load them up properly, supplies like ammunition, water, barbed wire, more grenades, corrugated iron, the kinds of things you need as you're moving forward. 4 tanks can do the work of 1,200 men in carrying all of that equipment. So you're actually using them in a very effective way. Aircraft also dropped supplies by parachute as the troops moved forward, an extra supply connection. And really this is a bite and hold tactic. As we said, small target really, very well planned. The Australian and Americans got there, held on, they took the bite, they held on, and that was it. They weren't planning to have some massive breakthrough. They had achieved their target, and Hamel stayed in Allied hands. So again, the Battle of Hamel is not one of those ones that's on our syllabus list, but it's a fantastic little look at how we are finally coordinating the weapons and tactics, which we've seen building up all the way through the war. And here we see them being used very effectively. So that's on the 4th of July. On the 18th of July, we see the Allies really start for real their full-on counter-offensive, counter-attack to that Ludendorff Spring offensive that we've already taken a look at. Up in the corner here, I've put General Foch, becomes Marshal Foch, and he is really quite important in coordinating the attacks, the Allied counter-offensives, because just like the Germans had done, we're not going to see just one area being attacked. we are going to see multiple offensives up and down the line, and that really takes that strategic overview to make it work. So Foch ensured movement of troop reserves and supplies to vital points at vital times. What we also see during this period now is the Americans. The Americans are finally here in numbers, and they join the attack. They're fresh, they're keen, and that just adds, lifting the morale of the Allies, but also bringing in the fresh troops, which are greatly needed. At this point, in the middle of July 1918, despite just a few months earlier feeling that the war was slipping away from them, in the middle of July 1918, the Allies are now at an advantage. Okay, they're being well supplied from their home fronts. They've got the ammunition they need. We've got some fresh troops come in. They know that the Germans are at breaking point. And so this point is a significant one in the war as we start the Allied counteroffensive. Where we really see it starting is down here in the Marne. So it's really at exactly as a counterattack to the final German offensive. On July the 18th, the French counterattack and push back. And in fact, it's so successful that within half a month, they've retaken this whole salient position, including the town of Soissons. So all of this area was taken back by the French within a couple of weeks. This is how desperate the Germans are by this stage. The next battle I want to talk to you about just briefly is the Battle of Amiens. Now, you can see on this line that this is this salient here that has just been taken back by the French. And here we are further up on the line on the River Somme, the Battle of Amiens. The British are going to move forward. In fact, we've got British, Canadians, and French. Okay, the British, Australians, Canadians, the French, all moving through this area. Now, they've got this target here. They're not necessarily looking to take a massive amount of territory. Okay, in fact, they take about 4 to 5 kilometres. But this Battle of Amiens, which starts on the 8th of August, is known, in fact, Ludendorff himself called it the Black Day of the German Army. It's not about how much territory was lost. It's about the way that the German formations just seemed to collapse as the British and the British Army and the French came at them. So Ludendorff from this point understands that the war's been lost and it's just a matter of time. It was a very significant defeat for the Germans, this Battle of Amiens. Both of the initial offensives down here in the Marne and also up here at Amiens, back in the Somme, used coordinated attack of artillery, tanks, and aircraft. And the Germans were very weak in these sectors. Okay, the shock troops, they're well-trained troops, have basically been injured or killed, and the morale was terrible. In fact, one of the things that happens at this time is a huge number of German prisoners of war are taken during this time. This is a painting to show you just, all these prisoners. You can see the ones with the German helmets, but they're being escorted by Australians in this case, I think, being taken back to the town of Amiens behind the lines on the 8th of August. And in case you think this is a bit overdone, you can see here this is a photograph taken from about this time. Again, mostly Germans being taken back behind the lines. We're talking about huge numbers of prisoners. Now, it's not like the Germans are coming out of their trenches and just giving up, but rather than fight to the death, they are surrendering. That's how low the morale has got. The other thing to understand is that in each of these, we're seeing not only, taking territory, but once the offensive has reached its peak, just like the Germans had done, we're seeing the Allied commanders break it off and then start somewhere else. So this war of movement we've got happening in 1918, the strategies being used are quite different. We've still got large casualties happening, but we're not moving into a war of attrition at this stage. So we'll come back in a moment and see what happens next in the Allied counteroffensive.